Thank you, Gertrude. That was inspiring, and I find these to be extra large shoes to fill after listening to your story, and so much of what you had to say I don't have a personal understanding because I didn't live there and didn't go through your personal experiences, but I feel that oneness that you spoke of because I too grew up in an environment that was dysfunctional, that lacked opportunities, and so I feel much of the same pull toward correcting things and being able to make the world a better place by my being in it, and I feel very strongly about doing that. So thank you for your part in the world, and I think it's an honor to meet someone like you that comes from such a faraway place. It's a reminder that there is no distance between human beings. It doesn't matter where they're from, it doesn't matter what their backgrounds are. And today I'd really like to talk about the cultural gap that exists, and I think that this exists in all societies. There's always going to be misunderstandings, and particularly in the culture that I was raised in, being brought up in a polygamous home, there was a deep misunderstanding on both parts, the part of the polygamous, those that practiced polygamy and were a part of that religious environment, as well as those that were not allowed in. We refer to them as outsiders. And I think of that now as being something really sad, to think of other people, the hundreds of people that I watched walk down the sidewalk in front of my home as a child, and to see them as outsiders. I think of that now with a sort of pain inside, that there was such a disconnect. And I feel the poverty that I grew up with was a disconnect from other human beings. And the idea that I was supposed to be better than other people. And I found this to be a crippling idea, a crippling belief, rather than an elevating one. I'm sure that my parents believed that they were trying to give me something more, to want me to believe that I was better than others, that somehow I would live up to a higher standard or have greater morals. I'm not even sure what their motive for it exactly was, but I realized that they weren't trying to isolate us. They weren't trying to create a sense of disconnect, but that's exactly what happened. When you make yourself better than others, you cut yourself off from everyone. And effectively, that's what happened to all of us. I was raised in a home in Salt Lake. I was surrounded by people. There was a neighbor not 500 feet from the fence. We lived maybe a half a block from a high school, a large high school. And I used to watch kids walking down the sidewalk in front of my house. And they were no different to me than watching kids on a television screen in the living room. I had no more access to them emotionally, physically, or in any other way than if they had been on a screen. And I think that that left a scar inside of me, one that has driven me to change that, one that has motivated me to do something more, to feel so alone, even though I had my family and those other members of the culture that I belonged to and that I was born into. There was a sense of aloneness in the world, that I was holding up all of this existence on my shoulders. And I looked out the window at all those people and I wanted to share. I wanted to be a part of them. I wanted to be a part of the world. I wanted to be a part of Africa. I wanted to feel like I belonged to this world, and I felt just the opposite. I think that growing up in an abusive home, which we did, there was a sense of shame about who you were, and that it's a bit of a paradox to be told you're better than everyone else. And then when you're beaten, when you're slapped, when you're humiliated, when you're torn down with words, that creates a sense of worthlessness, a sense that you're not good enough and that you never will be. So I was raised with this conflicting experience. I struggled for years with the after effects of abuse, and it's something that I feel is really important that many people don't talk about. They don't talk about the simple things like verbal abuse. Physical abuse leaves a visible mark, but emotional abuse and verbal abuse, they just leave a mark inside of you that nobody else can see. And it's just been a struggle as I have grown up and reached a point in my life where I realized that the things that I was taught weren't true, that the value that I have inside of me is intrinsic. It's a part of who I am. I was born with it, as we all are. And these ideas that seem fundamental were a long time in coming. When I first left the culture as a 21-year-old, I sought to make others understand where I had come from. I believed that if I went out and explained to others what it was like living in a polygamous family, that somehow I would feel connected, that I would belong. And I attempted this many times, and every time I was left feeling more disconnected, with their mouths open in shock, or maybe just curiosity. They peppered me with questions because my child and my upbringing was so different from theirs. It merely made the contrast between our lives that much greater. And I went back to my life feeling more disconnected, more alone, more lost. Then I realized that I was doing it all backwards. What I really needed to do, and what I started doing from that point, is I needed to understand them, the outsider, the different one. Sometimes I would walk into the grocery store, and instead of wishing someone would say hi to me, to acknowledge me, I began reaching out in acknowledgement of others. And immediately I began to feel that gap close. I began to feel my human connection with that person across the counter, that librarian at the library that smiled, and she wasn't giving me what I needed. I was giving me what I needed by giving back, by giving it to her or whoever I had encountered. And I realized that, especially in Utah, but mostly in the United States, there is a very big misunderstanding about the polygamous culture. And it is my hope, and something that I talk about, especially to my friends that are practicing polygamists, that if they want to make a difference, if they want to make a change, if they want others to understand them and their reasons for practicing something that seems foreign to so many of us, that they need to reach out in understanding of others. And I think it was that idea that motivated me to write a book. I wrote my book for two really important reasons. The first reason was that I lived under the cloak of secrecy which is necessary if you are raised in an environment that is illegal. And polygamy is illegal in the United States. That requires a certain level of secrecy. And because of that secrecy, I felt I had to talk. I had to write. I had to expose, not so much to the world, but for me. I had to write what I hadn't been able to say out loud. I had to bear the secrets that I carried inside of me. And the other reason was to connect, to make that connection, to bridge that gap between that outside world and the inside, which was me, which was my own inner soul. In the years growing up, the element of secrecy was the most damaging. And I don't say that lightly, because we were routinely beaten as children in what I realize on a regular basis was very brutal. And it's taken me a long time to even acknowledge that, because when you grow up with something, especially something that's cultural, and abuse was cultural, it was accepted, it was expected, and it was passed down from one generation to the next. And what you don't realize is that it's not normal. And for me, it was completely normal. Now, having said that, I think, and I testify from my own life, that the soul knows when something is wrong. And even though I had been conditioned, my parents had been conditioned, and their parents had all been conditioned to see abuse as normal and acceptable, that part of me that transcends all things human understood that what was happening was wrong. And I think that that spark, that little something, is in all of us. And I wrote the book because I had to heal that part of me that had been disconnected, through both abuse, isolation, and a sense of elitism. All of this thrived under the cloak of secrecy. There was a severe lack of education as well in our family, and I find this ironic that we lived near a high school, and so many of us had nothing more than bare elementary education, when so much was possible. We weren't expected to go on and do much with our life. We were expected to get married, have lots of kids, share a husband, and keep the faith alive. One thing that I have found in a lot of my interviews or conversations with people is I'm often asked, there's this idea that religion and culture are separate. And it's something that I try to explain to people, that polygamy, as we know it, especially here in Utah, is not so much a religion. It's got its foundation in religion. The roots of its origins are in religion, but really today it's culture. It's a culture. It's something that's been passed down from generation to generation, and there's not very much understanding as to why people are believing what they believe, why they're behaving the way they behave. And because within the polygamous culture there's very large families, there's a multiplication of human beings that is, I think, very different from mainstream society. And I think that one of the most important things that I have talked about and continue to talk about is being able to recognize the difference between the religion and the culture. When you don't know anything else, you're going to repeat behaviors. And I certainly did that when I got married. I was married within the culture as well. My husband and I left shortly after we were married, but the behaviors didn't leave. Just because I left the group, just because I left the culture, didn't mean the behaviors changed. The abusive experiences of my past started to influence my parenting, and I didn't believe with any part of my soul that I would hurt my own kids. But the first time I slapped one of them, when I had sworn that I never would, I realized that there are some things that are beyond our conscious control. That you can't just tell yourself, I'm going to not abuse my kids, when there's a deep compulsion and an unresolved pain that is stronger than the decision to not do it. This was also part of the reason I wrote the book. I had to understand the pain of the past and how it was impacting my, raising my children. And what I saw as I began to write was how much I had kept inside, how much I was unwilling to talk about it, how difficult it was to share those experiences, and how necessary it was to forgive those experiences. Now, how do you forgive a lifetime of pain? A few select family members, for whatever reason, had been singled out, and we spent 2 or 3 years subsisting on maybe 500 or 600 calories a day. And I realized when I look back on that, that the rest of the family was out in the other room eating, and we were being punished. That we were denied food while there was food 10 feet away from the door where we were locked up, where we were caged like animals. I have a sister in the audience, and I know she knows. She was there with me. You don't get over something like that just because you decide in your mind that you're going to. Life just doesn't work that way. I stayed at home, being raised in that environment until I was 20 years old. I was homeschooled, if you could call it that. And that was all that I knew, was daily abuse. I didn't understand that my father had 3 wives at the time because that was his religion. I didn't understand why I had to stay in the house, why I had to hide behind the fence, why I had to duck when I saw the mail carrier bringing the mail to the mailbox so he wouldn't see my face at the window. I didn't understand any of it. By the time I finally left and moved away from that environment, knowing that all 45 of my brothers and sisters experienced something similar to what I had, it was just normal. But it's followed me around like a tail. And it didn't leave me just because I married a kind person. Just because I had kids of my own. I was compelled to undo what had been created inside of me. And I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to write a book, because I felt like the book carries that emotional part that was killing me. The pain, the truth of what happened that I was packing around that was causing me more pain, additional pain. After I had realized, after hitting one of my kids, that I had to turn inward and begin working on myself. I think this is where I relate to Gertrude in a completely different way, but it felt like there was a famine and a war and suffering going on inside of me. That I was this whole country, this whole continent of pain, and that I was perpetuating it if I didn't take care of it inside of me, that I would be part of the problem out there in the world by not taking care of what was inside of me. And I began at that moment in my early 20s on a long and rewarding journey of forgiveness, understanding, and healing. And in so doing, I have found all of the things that I was looking for, all of the things that I thought I didn't have. When I left the culture, I still kept with me the appearance, the dress, the braids, the ugly shoes. It was all a part of who I thought I was, part of the identity. And it was uncomfortable to try to do anything different. It was just familiar. And so little by little I experimented and I started changing my dress a little. The first time I put on a pair of pants, I'd been out of the culture for years, probably 5 years before I dared go to the store and buy pants. It seemed so wrong. Even though I understood in my conscious mind that there was nothing wrong with it, that conditioning, that way we were raised, that pants on a woman is wrong, just stayed with me. So I went out and bought the pants and I put them on and they were so comfortable. I decided right then and there I didn't care what. I was never going back. I completely understood why the world wore pants, why all those women out that window were wearing pants. But it never had made any sense to me when my mother said, that's wrong, they shouldn't be wearing those pants. I thought, well, they ought to just wear dresses then. Then I had my own experience, so I've been wearing pants ever since. And then the next thing that I did was I went to short sleeves. And wearing long sleeves was even a bigger deal than dresses and no pants. And so the first time I put on a shirt that was short-sleeved, it was just probably like walking around naked. It was really hard. But I knew that I had to get out there. I had to make this change. I was so desperate to connect and to be a part of the world, and this is how everyone out there was dressing, and this is how everyone else behaved, so maybe if I wear the clothes, I'll have the experience. Took me a few years after that before I finally got the courage to cut off all my hair, which was another no-no, that we were supposed to keep our hair long and not ever cut it. Sometimes my mother would get the scissors out and trim 1/2 inch of the dead ends off the bottom of my hair. Other than that, we were not to ever cut our hair. And that was a lot harder. You can't just switch out hairstyles when your mother comes over to visit. And so my decision to cut my hair was another huge step in that change, and I just went to the barber and just had him cut it off. I didn't want to do it in stages. I didn't want to try to get comfortable with it. I just said, just cut it off. And then I went home and I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to be with my hair. And so each one of these steps that I took not because I wanted to do them because I had some desire to do them as much as I wanted to connect. And I felt as long as I dressed weirdly, as long as I looked so different from others, nobody would want to be around me, and I couldn't connect. I'd already left all of the people in my community. I had left them. They were no longer accepting of me. I had to find a home. I had to find a place where I could fit in. But there was a big problem. It didn't work. It didn't work at all. It didn't matter what I looked like or how much I looked like that other person. Inside, I was still that different girl. Inside, I still had the braids. In my own mind, I was still unable to belong in the world. I often told people that I felt like that I had a big P branded into my forehead, polygamist. Even though I was just the product, but I felt that I couldn't get away from it. I felt that it was literally a part of me and others could see it and it didn't matter what I did. Writing my book was a way of embracing that, was a way of coming home to that. I was running away from where I had come from. I was running away from who I was. And by writing about it and hopefully helping others connect to the human element that is so lost sometimes when we look at other people, other cultures, other religions, other belief systems. We don't see the human being. We see the political ideology. We see the religion. We see whatever story we have imposed upon that person, how we have judged them, but we miss the most important part, and that's their humanness, their humanity. And I felt that that had been an empty place inside of me, that I had not been recognized. As a young girl, when I did go out the front gates, when I was confronted with those alien people that lived in that outside world, I wasn't met with a warm reception. There wasn't a lot of kindness in my initial experiences. I was called names, yelled at, spit on. Now, they were mostly teenagers, so having a few of those of my own, I do understand a little more why I had that experience, but in my mind, they were just those people out there, and they were being mean. Sometimes today, I'll be in the store or out somewhere, and I'll see a family, a polygamous family, and I'll see the mother with her dress and her wet hair combed back, and I see all the kids in tow, and they walk right past me. They don't look me in the eye, and they don't see me. And I look at them, and it's the most jarring experience, because that was me one day, a long time ago. That was me. And they don't see me. And I realized that all of those years when I felt so disconnected from the world, it was me disconnecting from them. I was the one who pulled away, not them. That I was the one creating this isolation for myself. I don't know how to describe what it feels like to heal from something. I only know that when you put your feet on that path, it happens on its own. All it takes is the desire, the motivation, that little spark when you smack your kid and you realize you're gonna become your parents. You're gonna become the one thing you were determined not to become. That plants a seed that grows even when you're not watering it. I took that moment and I changed. I decided, I don't know how I knew this, but I knew that if I forgave my past, I wouldn't repeat it. And the first question that I had on that path was, what is forgiveness? Being raised with a lot of religious beliefs, there were plenty of stories that I had heard and plenty of definitions for forgiveness, but none of them satisfied me. I needed to know more. I had an awful lot to forgive, and I had a very empty place inside of me that needed to be filled. And I had a lot of work to do. And what I have realized now, and it feels like every day I come to some new awareness, some expansion of my own understanding, that forgiveness is more about taking responsibility for yourself than it is about anybody else. And that's exactly what I did. Even asking the question, what is forgiveness? I began that process of taking responsibility for how I was feeling. And if I was feeling angry and vengeful, I was responsible for those feelings, not somebody else. And now I realize that forgiveness is not a means to an end. It is not something to be accomplished, but rather a practice, an experience, a beautiful experience at that. And I understand today that forgiveness is about making room for more. And I think that that sums it up better than anything I've ever heard or read about. That when I grew my heart big enough to hold the evils, the cruelty, the ignorance, and the suffering of others that caused them to do harm to me and those that I loved. And my heart was big enough to hold that, and love, and compassion, and caring and consideration. That is forgiveness to me. That I become an expansion of my former self, that my heart does not exchange one emotion for another. I don't turn hate into love. I simply become a container for both. I become broad enough and expansive is the only word that I can think of, that can hold both, that I can hold another person's desire to cause pain and hold my willingness to not perpetuate it together, that they aren't exclusive of one another. And I can hold those people who perpetrated against children anywhere responsible for those actions and still maintain compassion and understanding for why they were driven to do the abuses that they had done. Because hadn't I also walked in those shoes, hadn't I seen in myself how easy it is when you've been hurt to hurt others, especially the small and the weak? So in many ways, my life is a culmination of this learning, this growth, and being able to be big enough inside that I can hold it all. It's like day and night, light and dark. I don't want just one, and I don't want just the other. I want to be able to hold it all inside of me, and that is what has healed me. And when I think about the word heal, it comes from the word whole. And I know now that all those years I was trying to forgive by cutting out the bad that happened to me, by trying to excise it in some way. that I was actually violating myself. Healing is about wholeness. And I was able, and continue to do so, it's a practice, to have room for all of it. To have room for the darkness and the light, for evil and good. And that is my healing. And I learned about that by writing a book about abuse. And it's a book about overcoming abuse and realizing that what's inside of you is sometimes more powerful than all the forces in the world combined. I sat here and listened to Gertrude's story, and I couldn't help but think of the immeasurable suffering in the world. And how many times I've thought about, how do you help the world? How do you help people? And there are many, many ways to help. And I admire the tenacity. And there's many people like Gertrude. I've met them. The world is full of people that are out doing, not just talking, but doing. Making the sacrifices to make a difference. And I've often wondered in my little corner of the world, what am I doing? What difference am I making? And I understand that one of the contributions that I make, and we all make, is what's inside of me and what I carry with me in my soul, what I give to the world when I interact with any person, young, old, anywhere, that what I give to them is my gift. When I carry love inside of me, I am contributing to the love in the world in no small way. It's not measured in dollars and cents. Not to underestimate the importance of money in these times when people are struggling. But I was looking at my contribution as a different sort. There's so much hate in the world. It's the greatest poverty that there is. There's so much misunderstanding. There's so much selfishness. And it's all justified. It's all justified because somebody hurt me. Shouldn't I be made first? Shouldn't I have a right to complain? Don't I have that right after all I've been through? Don't I have a right to vengeance? And I realized that I was contributing to the hate in the world. And I watch the news and I see people killing each other. And I realized in a very real way, it's not just a theory or a concept. I realized I was a part of that. That was me. That killing and that hatred and that hurt to other fellow human beings was me. And when I could let that go, when I could forgive, and when I could be in a space of love, then I contributed to the love in the world. And the amazing thing is that I saw love when I did that. I saw that the world isn't full of hateful people. It's really full of amazing people. I've hardly ever even met a single person. I don't even think I've met anyone that I didn't see their contribution and the love inside of them and how they're doing everything they can to make their world and our shared world a better place. And I think I see it because I see it in me now. I have a philosophy that I live by and I like to quote to my kids. You get what you give. And I really believe this in every way possible. Gertrude's story of coincidences and miracles is a perfect example, and I have a life filled with examples of you get what you give. And I realize that when I give love, when I give kindness, when some guy cuts me off on the street when I'm driving and I don't react with irritation, but when I react with understanding that maybe he needed to go somewhere more urgently than I did, I realize that what I've given is in me. When I give compassion, I recognize that it is inside of me, and therefore it is mine. It was always there, I just didn't recognize it. This idea of karma coming, you do a good deed and then a good deed comes back to you like a boomerang. I think that the good deed that comes back is the deed itself. It's the instantaneous experience that springs from yourself. And when you realize that love and that kindness and that moment when I did something good for another person, that came from within me, I realized that I have it. I got it. It's mine. It isn't something I have to wait for, some good deed that's going to come back to me. It's instant. My book has been an example of that over and over to me. I put my words out, my story out into the world with trepidation and fear, and what I have met and experienced as a result of it has been nothing but love, kindness, understanding, acknowledgement, validation, and support. More so than I could ever hope to have in this lifetime. Fulfilled me in ways that I never dreamed I could ever be fulfilled. So no results that I will ever have from selling it, from connecting with people, will ever outdo what I've already been given. Nothing can outshine the gift that it's already been in my life. And the risk that I took has paid back in major returns for me. I have friends that have come out of that. I have met some of the most incredible people. To think that I'm standing here today and sharing this pulpit with Gertrude, it's all connected, we're all one, and there's nothing like this experience that I've had in my life that has proven that truth to me more. It's an honor to have been here and spoken today and shared a few of my thoughts and my experiences. It's a joy for me to have this moment to connect with all of you, some of you that I know and some of you that I don't know. It doesn't matter anymore. I feel that sense of oneness, that sense of belonging in the world that eluded me, that caused so much suffering, has been removed. The blinders from my eyes have been removed. And I see that I was always part of this world. I was always an important part, as each person is. That no person can be removed from the equation without destroying the formula that created it. So thank you for hearing me, and it's been my pleasure.